What would you do if the police raided your house, only to realize you were their new boss? What if the people storming through your front door were the same ones you were supposed to lead the next day? How would you react if those armed officers pinned you down, treating you like a criminal, only to find out minutes later that you're actually their newly appointed chief of police? And how would they feel after making that mistake? This is not just another viral headline. It's a real event that raises deep questions about the power of perception, authority, and race. Could this incident have happened to someone else? Was it a mistake rooted in profiling? And most importantly, what does it reveal about the challenges in modern law enforcement? In today's video, we take you through this incredible story, filled with drama, shocking turns, and eye-opening lessons. But this isn't just about a raid gone wrong. It's about assumptions we make every day, the consequences of those assumptions, and the hidden biases in policing that often go unnoticed. By the end of this video, you'll uncover how one man's identity changed everything in an instant, and what this incident means for the future of police reform. You'll learn why small moments like this can have a big impact on the larger system and challenge how law enforcement operates. Stay with us as we dive deep into lesser-known facts, ask tough questions, and explore what this story says about society as a whole. But the story doesn't end with the raid. What happens next is where things get truly interesting, and it will leave you with a powerful message. So make sure to watch till the very end. The twists might surprise you, and the final takeaway might leave you rethinking the way policing should work. With that said, let's get started. Imagine the fear of a police raid, a sudden invasion, the doors splintering open, officers charging in, shouting commands, guns drawn. Now picture the man inside, confused and terrified, as officers force him to the ground, treating him like a criminal in his own home. But the real twist: this man isn't just anyone. He's about to become their new chief of police. How could such a shocking mistake happen? This isn't a story that simply revolves around procedural error. At the heart of this event lies a troubling set of assumptions, and it's these assumptions that escalate an ordinary situation into something extraordinary. When the officers entered the man's house, they weren't just enforcing a warrant. They were acting on preconceptions. The man's race, location, or even demeanor might have fueled the snap judgments that led to the raid being conducted with excessive force. But when they realized who he really was, their soon-to-be boss, the story instantly flipped. The room, once filled with aggression, would have been replaced by shock and silence. Imagine the faces of the officers as they pieced together their grave mistake. They came in believing they were confronting a suspect, but they found themselves in the home of their new leader. The weight of this realization likely hit them all at once. Not only had they raided the home of a man in power, but they had also exposed a systemic flaw. How easily perceptions about race, power, and authority can blur under pressure. This incident holds a mirror to many hidden problems in policing. Why were the officers so quick to treat the man as a suspect? Was it just a misunderstanding, or did unconscious bias play a role? These are the kinds of questions that often go unanswered, buried under the justification of standard procedure. But moments like this show that even the smallest missteps in policing can have profound consequences. Now think about the impact this could have had on the man himself. What must he have felt? A mixture of fear, anger, betrayal. Imagine waking up knowing you're the one who will soon leave these officers, and suddenly finding yourself pinned down by them, handcuffed, and treated like a criminal. His very authority was invalidated in the blink of an eye, based on nothing more than assumptions made by people who were supposed to serve and protect. But what about the officers? The moment they realized their mistake, they weren't just confronting the man they had wrongly targeted. They were facing their own prejudices and the uncomfortable truth about how easily power dynamics can shift. It's likely they experienced a range of emotions: embarrassment, fear of punishment, or even guilt for mistreating someone they would soon call chief. This incident also brings up broader questions. What if the man hadn't been the new chief? Would the officers have treated him differently if they had known his title beforehand? And how many other people have faced similar situations, but without the benefit of holding a position of power to shield them from harsher outcomes? These questions reveal the deep-rooted flaws within a system where assumptions can lead to dangerous. This moment, though seemingly unique, isn't isolated. It's part of a larger pattern that highlights issues within policing, how assumptions about race, authority, and status can shape interactions between citizens and officers. It reveals how quickly an innocent person can be treated as guilty based on appearance or circumstance alone. And more than anything, it shows that even those who enforce the law can get it wrong, with consequences that ripple far beyond the immediate moment. But this raid ended differently. Unlike countless other cases, the man in this story wasn't just another name or statistic. He had the power to change things, and the irony of the situation couldn't be more striking. The officers, thinking they were in control, were forced to confront the reality that the man they subdued would soon have control over them. What happens when the lines between power, prejudice, and responsibility blur? This story leaves us with lingering questions about how these moments can reshape both individuals and the systems they operate within. And it forces us to ask, how many mistakes like this go unnoticed or uncorrected, simply because the person on the other side doesn't have the privilege of power to reveal the truth? The air hung heavy with tension in the wake of the raid, a silence that felt almost deafening. Officers stood awkwardly, still grappling with the reality of their mistake. The man they had just apprehended was no longer just a suspect. He was their new chief. As the realization sank in, the mood shifted from one of authority to vulnerability. How would they face him now? Would they be able to respect him, knowing they had misjudged him so profoundly? Picture the scene. The chief, still shaken but quickly gathering his composure, watches the officers as they recover from their initial shock. His heart pounds, not just from fear, but from the weight of responsibility that now rests on his shoulders. He knows that this incident will become a defining moment not only in his career, but in the relationship between the police and the community they serve. As news of the raid spread, it ignited conversations across the community. People began questioning how their police force could make such a glaring error. Social media exploded with opinions, memes, and a wave of outrage. How could they treat our new chief like a criminal? What if this had happened to someone without the same privileges? The incident became a flashpoint for discussions about race, authority, and systemic flaws within law enforcement. But while many rallied in support of their new chief, others found it difficult to shake off the initial fear and confusion. Trust was shaken, and the narrative that formed around the chief's story was complex. For some, he became a symbol of hope, a man who could change the broken system from the inside. For others, he was just another figure in a long line of authority, representing the very institution they had come to distrust. As the chief began to take on his role, he faced not just the challenge of leading his department, but also the daunting task of restoring faith among the community members. He realized that he had a unique opportunity to change the way policing was perceived. His experiences could serve as a bridge between the officers and the people they were meant to protect. He knew that transparency would be crucial. He needed to show the community that he was not only a leader, but also an ally. But in the back of his mind, the events of that day lingered like a shadow. How could he ensure that such a mistake would never happen again? The chief felt a deep responsibility to address the biases that led to the raid. He wanted to implement training programs that highlighted the importance of empathy and understanding in policing. After all, if officers could mistakenly raid the home of their boss, how many other innocent lives have been affected by similar assumptions? Behind closed doors, discussions within the department became heated. Some officers, perhaps embarrassed by the incident, were defensive, reluctant to acknowledge their biases. Others were eager to support the chief, ready to learn and adapt to a new way of policing. The chief found himself navigating these dynamics, understanding that change would not come easily. There were battles to be fought, not just against external forces, but within the department itself. Then came the community meetings, where residents voiced their fears, frustrations, and hopes. The chief stood before them, his heart racing. He was no longer just an officer. He was a leader facing the very people who had been harmed by the system he now oversaw. Would they listen? Would they accept him as someone who could bring about change? Every meeting was a delicate dance. He shared his story, explained the changes he wanted to implement, and acknowledged the trauma that the raid had caused, not just to him, but to the entire community. He listened intently to their stories, their struggles, and their pain. Each voice added to the fabric of a narrative that was slowly shifting. He could feel a change in the room, an acknowledgement of shared humanity. Yet the road ahead was not smooth. As the chief worked to repair the trust, he encountered pushback from those who were skeptical of change. Some believed he was merely performing for the cameras, while others feared that he would be unable to break the old habits that plagued the department. The pressure mounted. Would he be able to keep his promise of reform in the face of adversity? Each day brought new challenges. Officers who had once believed in their authority now faced the reality that their actions had consequences. How would they adapt to this new reality? Would they embrace a future where they viewed their role as protectors rather than enforcers? The chief understood that this was a time of reckoning. His leadership was put to the test, with every decision scrutinized and every interaction weighed against the backdrop of the incident that had brought them here. And amidst all this turmoil, the question remained, could this man, who had once been treated like a criminal, truly change the perception of policing in their community? As he looked around at the faces of his officers, some supportive, others doubtful, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He knew he had to prove them all wrong. The stakes were high, and the future of policing in their community depended on it. In the heart of the community, reactions to the unexpected turn of events were as varied as the people themselves. News of the police raid spread like wildfire, igniting conversations, debates, and a wave of emotions that swept through the neighborhoods. For some, this was just another story of injustice, but for others, it felt like a beacon of hope. Imagine a local diner, where the usual chatter was replaced by whispers and heated discussions. Families gathered around tables, their meals forgotten as they exchanged thoughts on the incident. "Can you believe it?" one woman exclaimed, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "How could they raid the home of our new chief? It just shows how little they respect us." Others nodded in agreement, their faces a blend of frustration and determination. This wasn't just about the chief. It was about the larger issues that plagued their community. On the other side of town, however, the reaction was different. Some residents questioned the chief's ability to lead, feeling that his sudden rise to power was tainted by the circumstances of the raid. "How can we trust someone who was mistaken for a criminal?" a local business owner argued. "This just shows that the police still don't understand us." The tension was palpable, a reminder of the deep divisions that still existed within the community. Social media platforms exploded with opinions. Hashtags trended, both supporting the chief and condemning the police department. Posts ranged from heartfelt stories of how the chief had been a part of the community for years, to biting critiques of the police force that had failed them. One post captured the sentiment perfectly. "How can we trust a system that doesn't even know its own leader?" The narrative was loud and clear. People were no longer willing to stay silent. Yet, amidst the chaos, there were voices of unity. Community leaders organized town hall meetings, creating spaces for dialogue and understanding. People began to share their stories, their fears, and their hopes for a better future. "We need to work together," one community organizer said passionately. "This incident is a chance to change the narrative, to rebuild trust." There was an undeniable energy in the room, a shared determination to move beyond the divide. The chief, meanwhile, stood at the center of this storm. He watched as the community grappled with its emotions, feeling the weight of their expectations on his shoulders. Every time he spoke, he felt the piercing gaze of those who were skeptical, the weight of their doubts pressing down on him. Could he truly be the change they sought? Could he rebuild the trust that had been shattered by the very force he now led? He decided to take action. He reached out to the community, offering to host open forums where residents could express their concerns. He wanted to listen, to truly listen. As he sat in those meetings, he felt the raw emotions in the room. Some residents shared their harrowing experiences with police brutality, their voices shaking with pain. Others spoke of their hopes for a safer, more just community. Each story added another layer to the complex tapestry of emotions surrounding the incident. As the weeks went by, the chief found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. One moment, he felt inspired by the unity he witnessed. The next, he was crushed by the weight of skepticism that hung over him. Every decision he made seemed scrutinized. When he proposed new training for officers, some praised him while others questioned his authority. "What does he know about policing?" they whispered. But the chief pressed on. He knew that real change was a long game, one that required patience and resilience. He felt a sense of urgency. Every day was a chance to prove himself to the community. He began implementing changes to the department's policies, emphasizing transparency and accountability. He shared updates on social media, inviting the public to hold him accountable. But not everyone was on board with his plans. There were whispers among some officers who felt threatened by the shift in power dynamics. They had been accustomed to operating in the shadows, away from public scrutiny. As the chief pushed for openness, he faced resistance from those who felt their authority was being challenged. The tension within the department escalated, creating a rift that would test his leadership like never before. The public's reaction became a double-edged sword. As some embraced the chief's vision for change, others remained entrenched in their beliefs, unwilling to accept a new narrative. Yet, through it all, the chief maintained his resolve. He was determined to be a bridge between the police and the community, to foster understanding even in the face of doubt. In those moments of uncertainty, he often thought back to the day of the raid. It was a turning point, a moment that forced everyone to confront their biases and preconceptions. As the chief stood at the intersection of fear and hope, he understood that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it. With every conversation, every meeting, and every interaction, he aimed to reshape not just the police department, but the very fabric of the community itself. In the wake of the shocking police raid, the new chief found himself standing on a precipice. The community was watching, waiting to see if he could rise above the chaos and redefine the relationship between the police force and the people they served. His heart raced as he considered the enormity of the task ahead. Could he truly transform the narrative that had plagued his department for years? The chief began to realize that the first step towards redemption lay in communication. He needed to connect with the community, not just as a leader, but as a fellow resident. He scheduled open forums, hoping to create a space where residents could voice their fears and frustrations. Each meeting felt like stepping into a storm, with emotions running high. As he sat on that stage, looking out at the sea of faces, he felt both hope and trepidation. At one of these forums, a woman stood up, her voice trembling as she recounted her experience with police officers. "They don't see us. They don't understand our lives," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. The room fell silent, every ear tuned to her words. The chief listened intently, feeling the weight of her story. It was moments like this that reminded him of why he wanted to be a chief in the first place, to serve and protect, not just in title, but in action. But not everyone was ready to forgive. As he made strides toward transparency, some officers began to feel uneasy. Whispers spread through the police department, casting shadows over his efforts. "He's trying to turn us into a community service, not a police force," one officer grumbled in a break room, the frustration evident in his voice. Tensions grew, and the chief could sense the divide deepening. His leadership was being challenged from within, and every day felt like a battle. As the weeks passed, the community began to respond to the chief's efforts. More residents started attending the forums, and the conversations became more profound. They shared their hopes for a safer neighborhood, a future where the police were allies, not adversaries. The chief found himself energized by their enthusiasm, but he knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. Actions were necessary to mend the fractured trust. The chief initiated community policing programs, which aimed to foster relationships between officers and residents. Officers would spend time in local schools, participating in events, and getting to know the youth. But implementing this change wasn't easy. Some officers resisted the idea, viewing it as a demotion of their duties. The chief felt the strain between the traditional view of policing and the new approach he envisioned. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, he sat in his office, poring over reports and community feedback. The stress weighed heavily on him, and he found himself questioning his path. Was it too ambitious to hope for a complete overhaul of the department? Suddenly, he remembered the stories he had heard, the pain and anger. Those memories ignited a spark within him. He couldn't back down now. Too many lives were at stake. Determined to bridge the gap, he organized a day of service, where police officers would volunteer alongside community members to clean up neighborhoods and provide resources. The event brought people together, and slowly, barriers began to break down. As they worked side by side, laughter replaced tension. The chief watched as a young officer helped an elderly resident carry groceries, and for a moment, he felt a wave of relief. This was the connection he had envisioned. However, there were still voices of dissent. On social media, critics pointed out the disparity between the chief's words and the reality of police interactions. "They can't change overnight," one commenter wrote. "The system is too broken." The chief recognized that rebuilding trust would be a long and challenging process. He couldn't ignore the doubts and fears that still existed. Despite the obstacles, the chief remained steadfast. He began sharing more about the department's internal changes, highlighting new training focused on empathy and cultural awareness. He knew that if officers could understand the communities they serve, they could make better decisions on the streets. As he unveiled new policies, he felt a surge of determination. This was his moment to redefine the role of the police. One evening, he sat down with his officers, addressing their concerns head-on. "I know change is hard," he said, looking each officer in the eye. "But if we want to build a better future, we must embrace it together." There was a palpable tension in the room as he spoke, and he could sense the skepticism. Some remained silent, their expressions hard to read, while others nodded, slowly coming around. In the days that followed, the chief continued to meet with community leaders, gathering feedback and insights. He opened up channels of communication, ensuring that residents felt heard. Each conversation was a stepping stone toward healing. He started seeing small changes within his team as well. Some officers began to join the community events, sharing their own stories and forging connections. As the chief navigated this tumultuous journey, he realized that change wasn't a straight path. There would be setbacks, but he was committed to pushing forward. Each step taken toward trust, each hand extended in friendship, felt like a small victory in the face of doubt. He had a vision for the future, and he knew that together they could achieve it. The day had finally come. The new chief stood at the podium, preparing to announce the changes that would redefine policing in his community. His heart raced as he glanced at the gathered crowd, a mix of supporters and skeptics. This was not just an announcement. It was a promise to the people who had suffered under a system that often felt oppressive and unjust. He knew the weight of his words, but the stakes were high. Could he truly bring about the change he envisioned? As he opened his mouth to speak, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The room was thick with tension. The police department had a troubled past, marked by accusations of brutality and discrimination. Every eye in the room seemed to demand accountability. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that the truth was often uncomfortable but necessary. "Today, we start a new chapter," he said, his voice steady yet firm. "We will not only serve this community, but we will also hold ourselves accountable to it." His statement was met with mixed reactions. Some people cheered, while others exchanged skeptical glances. The chief knew that to gain the community's trust, he had to ensure transparency in every action taken by the department. He announced the implementation of body cameras for all officers, a move that stirred hope and concern in equal measure. Would this truly change the way officers interacted with the community, or would it merely serve as a facade? As the weeks unfolded, the chief witnessed the complexities of accountability. Officers, once comfortable in their ways, were now navigating uncharted territory. Some embraced the new policies, eager to demonstrate their commitment to change. Others, however, resisted. In one department meeting, an officer stood up, his voice trembling with anger. "This isn't how we do things. You're making us weak." The room went silent, and the chief felt the heat of tension rising. This challenge revealed the fractures within the department. The chief recognized that he had to address these fears head-on. He organized training sessions, emphasizing the importance of accountability in building trust. "It's not about punishment, it's about understanding," he explained, trying to ease the anxiety in the room. He told them stories of residents who had been harmed by past actions, urging officers to see beyond their badges. "We're human beings first," he reminded them. Yet, as he worked to bridge the gap, there were setbacks that shook his resolve. Just weeks after implementing body cameras, a controversial incident occurred. A video surfaced online showing officers using excessive force during an arrest. The community erupted in outrage. The chief felt the ground shift beneath him. All his hard work seemed to hang by a thread. Could he regain the trust he had fought so hard to build? In the face of the backlash, the chief knew he had to act decisively. He called an emergency press conference, ready to face the public. His heart raced as he stepped in front of the cameras, knowing that every word would be scrutinized. "I want to acknowledge what happened," he began, his voice firm but somber. "This is unacceptable, and I promise we will investigate thoroughly. Accountability starts with me." The media coverage was intense, and criticism flooded in from all sides. Activists demanded justice, and citizens took to the streets, chanting for change. The chief felt the pressure mounting, the weight of a community that demanded more than just words. He and his team worked around the clock, reviewing the footage, interviewing witnesses, and gathering evidence. Every moment felt like a race against time. Days turned into nights, and as the investigation progressed, the chief faced his own inner turmoil. He replayed the video in his mind, grappling with the implications. Could this incident have been prevented? What did it say about the culture within the department? As he lay awake at night, the chief felt the responsibility of leadership. He knew that this was not just about punishment, but about transforming a mindset. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the investigation concluded. The chief stood before his officers, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on his shoulders. He announced the findings and the disciplinary actions that would follow. "We must own our mistakes," he declared. "It's how we move forward." The reactions were mixed. Some officers showed support, while others grumbled in disagreement. But the chief felt a flicker of hope. This was a pivotal moment, a chance for the department to recommit to its values. He began implementing community engagement initiatives, where officers would meet with residents to discuss their concerns openly. As the days turned into weeks, the chief noticed small changes taking root. Officers were more vigilant, and the community began to respond positively. Families who once felt alienated started attending police-sponsored events. The road to rebuilding trust was long, but the chief remained determined. Every step, every conversation was a building block toward a new future. Yet he knew that accountability was a continuous journey, not a destination. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities. With each officer who accepted the need for change, the chief felt more confident. He realized that true leadership was not about perfection, but about resilience, empathy, and the courage to confront the uncomfortable truths. The path was rocky, but he was ready to walk it, step by step, with his community. As the new chief of police settled into his role, he knew that true change wouldn't just come from reforms in the department. It had to reach the heart of the community, resonating with every resident, young and old. He often asked himself, how do you rebuild a bridge that has been burned? This question haunted him as he reviewed the police department's troubled history. Stories of distrust filled the air, and the chief understood that to succeed, he had to foster real connections. His first move was to hold community meetings, open forums where residents could voice their concerns and share their stories. He stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of their gazes. Would they accept him? As he spoke, he could sense a mix of skepticism and hope in the air. I'm here to listen, he said, his voice steady. We need to know how we can serve you better. The stories that unfolded were raw and powerful. One woman spoke of the day the police wrongfully raided her home, leaving her family shaken and afraid. A teenager shared how he felt targeted every time he walked down the street. Each tale struck a chord, weaving a tapestry of hurt and mistrust. The chief felt his heart ache with every word. He realized the enormity of his responsibility. These were not just stories. They were the voices of his community, and he was determined to change the narrative. As the weeks passed, he initiated outreach programs aimed at building rapport between officers and residents. He paired officers with local youth, creating mentorship programs that focused on education, sports, and the arts. The chief envisioned a future where officers were seen as allies, not adversaries. Yet, change didn't come without challenges. Some officers resisted, grumbling about the softening of the police force. We're not babysitters, one officer exclaimed during a department meeting. The tension in the room was palpable, and the chief knew he had to tread carefully. To bridge this divide, he organized team-building exercises that pushed officers out of their comfort zones. During one particular exercise, they took part in a community cleanup day. Officers worked side by side with residents, clearing trash from local parks and painting over graffiti. The chief joined in, sweating under the sun, but he didn't care. This was about more than just cleaning. It was about breaking down walls. As they worked, laughter replaced the usual tension, and he saw smiles where there once were frowns. However, not all interactions were easy. One day, the chief received an unexpected call about a confrontation between a group of officers and a local business owner. Tensions flared, and accusations flew. The chief rushed to the scene, knowing this was a critical moment. As he arrived, he saw the owner, a middle-aged man, waving his arms in frustration while officers stood defensively. The chief stepped forward, aware that this was a chance to demonstrate the values he preached. Let's take a step back and talk, he said calmly, addressing both parties. What's happening here? The conversation quickly revealed deeper issues. The business owner felt harassed, while the officers believed they were enforcing the law. It was a classic case of miscommunication. The chief facilitated a dialogue, encouraging both sides to listen. After what felt like an eternity, they found common ground. The owner agreed to work with the police to create a better relationship, and the officers recognized the need for understanding. These interactions became the foundation of a new culture, one rooted in empathy and respect. But the chief knew that building a legacy required consistency. He started an annual community event, bringing families together for food, games, and discussions. This festival became a local tradition, a day where everyone could come together, leaving past grievances behind. But just when it seemed that progress was steady, a new challenge arose. A controversial incident at a nearby precinct made headlines, reigniting the national conversation about police accountability. The chief felt the familiar dread creeping back. Would his community's progress unravel? He scheduled an emergency meeting, knowing the fears and questions would come pouring in. Today, I stand before you not just as your chief, but as a member of this community, he began. We must continue to learn from our mistakes, and I promise you that we will hold ourselves accountable. His words resonated, igniting passionate discussions. The community rallied around their chief, and together they navigated the turbulence, using it as an opportunity for growth. Slowly but surely, the seeds of change began to blossom. The chief watched as younger generations became active participants in policing initiatives. Local youth joined advisory boards, and together they developed programs tailored to the community's needs. The atmosphere began to shift. Residents approached officers with newfound trust, sharing tips, concerns, and ideas. The department embraced the community, organizing workshops on topics like conflict resolution and cultural awareness. The chief felt a surge of hope every time he witnessed these interactions. He saw officers engaging with families, helping children learn about safety, and promoting a sense of belonging. The chief's journey wasn't without hurdles, but he remained steadfast in his mission. He knew that lasting change required dedication, not just from him, but from everyone involved. Each step he took reinforced the belief that accountability, understanding, and community engagement could transform not just a police department, but a community as a whole. The legacy he envisioned was unfolding before him, but he understood that this was just the beginning. With each story shared, every bridge rebuilt, and every conversation held, the chief knew that the path to lasting change was a collective effort, one that would require unwavering commitment and courage from all sides. As the new chief of police began his tenure, he quickly realized that leadership in law enforcement was not merely about authority, it was about connection. Every officer and citizen brought their own story, their own struggles, and their own hopes. He asked himself, what does it mean to lead with compassion in a position often seen as authoritative? This question resonated deeply as he faced the challenges of transforming a department that was often seen as distant and unapproachable. His leadership style was a blend of humility and strength. He made it a point to meet every officer in the department, from the seasoned veterans to the fresh recruits. In these meetings, he didn't sit behind a desk. Instead, he invited them to share their experiences, their frustrations, and their aspirations. He listened intently, nodding as they spoke, his eyes reflecting genuine interest. "What can we do better?" he often asked. This simple question became his mantra, breaking down barriers and fostering a culture of open dialogue. However, not all officers were receptive. Some viewed his approach as weak, believing that discipline should come from a place of fear. They grumbled about his soft tactics during roll call, questioning his authority. The chief felt the tension brewing within the ranks, and he knew he had to act decisively to win over skeptics while maintaining his principles. One day, during a particularly charged department meeting, a senior officer confronted him directly. "You think this is a playground, Chief. We need structure, not hugs." The room fell silent, eyes darting between the chief and the officer. The chief's heart raced, but he remained calm. "Structure is important," he replied steadily, "but structure without trust is just a facade. We need both." The tension in the air was thick, but his words struck a chord with some. He had planted the seed of change, but it would take time to grow. To illustrate his vision, he introduced a community policing initiative that required officers to engage with neighborhoods regularly. Instead of just responding to calls, officers would take walks, participate in local events, and hold informal gatherings. This approach was met with skepticism from many in the department. "You want us to socialize?" One officer scoffed, yet the chief was undeterred. He took to the streets himself, joining officers in these engagements. His presence served as a powerful message. He believed in this new direction. One day, while patrolling a local park, he encountered a group of children playing basketball. They were laughing, their joy infectious. The chief joined in, challenging them to a game. He felt a wave of excitement wash over him as he played. The children cheered him on, forgetting for a moment that he was their chief of police. For them, he was just another player. In that instant, he saw the power of connection. Later, he watched as the children rushed to their parents, exclaiming about the day they played ball with the chief. It was a small victory, but it was significant. Yet, as he focused on community relations, he faced backlash from within the department. Officers who preferred the old ways voiced their frustrations. They felt unsupported and questioned the efficacy of the new approach. During another department meeting, the chief listened as officers expressed their doubts. How can we fight crime if we're busy playing basketball? One officer argued, arms crossed defiantly. This was the turning point. Instead of becoming defensive, the chief decided to share his vision again, backed by data and real-life examples. Research shows that community engagement leads to lower crime rates, he explained. He highlighted successful programs from across the country, showcasing how cities had transformed by prioritizing relationships over intimidation. The room began to shift, a sense of curiosity replacing skepticism. However, the challenge wasn't just internal. The chief faced immense pressure from the media and the community, especially following high-profile incidents involving police misconduct in nearby precincts. The community watched closely, eager to see if the changes would truly take root. They had heard promises before. The chief understood that every interaction counted, and he needed to lead by example. As he navigated these challenges, he held listening sessions in various neighborhoods. Residents gathered to share their experiences with law enforcement, and the chief took meticulous notes. One night, a mother spoke about her fears for her son, who was often stopped by police. "I worry for his safety," she confessed, tears in her eyes. The chief listened intently, feeling the weight of her words. In the weeks that followed, he took tangible steps to address these fears. He organized training sessions for officers on cultural sensitivity, emphasizing the importance of understanding and respecting the communities they served. He brought in experts who spoke about the historical context of policing in marginalized communities, urging officers to see beyond the badge and connect with the humanity of those they interacted with. The chief knew that the road ahead was fraught with obstacles, but he remained committed to his vision. As he walked through the community, he felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He understood that leadership was a journey, one filled with moments of triumph and setbacks. But through it all, he held on to the belief that compassion could pave the way for meaningful change. Each day, he woke up determined to prove that true leadership wasn't just about being in charge. It was about being present, listening, and fostering trust within the community he had sworn to serve. As the new chief of police continued to implement his vision for community engagement, the response from the public was mixed. Some citizens were wary, unsure if this was just another attempt to change the narrative without real substance. They had witnessed too many promises from previous leaders that had ultimately fizzled out. The chief felt this skepticism deeply. He knew that trust could not be forced, but had to be earned over time. One day, the chief decided to hold a public forum at a local community center. The room was filled with residents, some hopeful and others skeptical. As he took the stage, he could feel the weight of their gazes, each one a mixture of curiosity and doubt. He cleared his throat, ready to address the crowd. "I'm here to listen to you," he began. "Your voices matter. Your experiences matter." As he spoke about his plans for community policing, a woman in the back raised her hand. "What makes you different from the last chief?" she asked, her voice sharp and demanding. The crowd murmured, clearly intrigued. The chief paused, knowing this was a pivotal moment. "I understand your doubts. I have them too. But I'm committed to this community and to changing the way we interact." His words hung in the air, a mix of vulnerability and determination. Throughout the evening, people began to share their stories. Some spoke about their fear during police encounters, while others shared positive experiences. A local business owner stood up, recalling a time when officers helped him during a robbery. "I believe in what you're doing, but you have to follow through," he said, looking directly at the chief. The chief nodded, understanding that words alone would not suffice. Weeks passed, and the chief pushed forward with his initiatives. He organized neighborhood events where officers and residents could mingle in a casual environment. These gatherings were designed to break down barriers and foster understanding. One Friday evening, A block party took place in a neighborhood known for its tensions with law enforcement. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and the smell of grilled food. As the chief walked through the crowd, he noticed a group of young men playing basketball. He decided to join them, hoping to connect on a personal level. He was clumsy on the court, but that didn't matter. The kids laughed, and for a moment, they forgot he was their chief. They saw him as just another player, which was precisely what he wanted. In those moments, he felt the walls beginning to crumble. However, not everyone was pleased. A few community members expressed concern that the chief was being too lenient. They feared that the efforts to connect with the youth would be perceived as weakness. One evening, a local activist voiced these concerns during a community meeting. "You can't play games with people who might be criminals," she exclaimed. The room fell silent, tension rising. The chief took a deep breath, aware of the gravity of the moment. "I'm not here to play games," he replied calmly. "I'm here to build relationships. Trust takes time, but it can save lives." His words were met with mixed reactions. Some nodded in agreement, while others remained unconvinced. Despite the resistance, the chief pushed on. He created programs that encouraged dialogue between officers and residents. One such initiative was a Coffee with a Cop program, where officers would visit local cafes to discuss community issues over a cup of coffee. The first event was held at a popular spot, and the turnout was surprising. Residents began to engage with officers, discussing everything from neighborhood concerns to personal stories. However, not every interaction was positive. At one coffee event, a man confronted an officer about a past incident where he felt mistreated. The atmosphere grew tense as the man raised his voice. The chief, witnessing the confrontation, stepped in. "Let's talk about this. I want to hear your story," he said, his voice steady. The man hesitated but eventually agreed to sit down with the chief and the officer. As they spoke, the tension eased. They explored the man's feelings, allowing for an open and honest dialogue. This moment showcased the chief's commitment to addressing the community's concerns directly, fostering a sense of accountability. As time passed, the community began to see the chief's efforts bear fruit. The atmosphere shifted, with more residents expressing support for the police department. They noticed officers engaging with youth, participating in community events, and showing a genuine interest in the neighborhoods they served. The chief's presence became a beacon of hope for many, particularly in areas where mistrust had been deeply rooted. One evening, as he drove home after a long day, the chief received a call from one of his officers. "We just received a report of a potential disturbance in the neighborhood," the officer said. "It might be a good opportunity to check in." Without hesitation, the chief turned his car around, heading straight to the scene. When he arrived, he found a small group of people arguing outside a convenience store. The air was thick with tension, and the chief could feel the weight of the moment. Instead of calling for backup, he decided to approach the group himself. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone calm and inviting. The crowd quieted, surprised by his presence. One man stepped forward, explaining that a misunderstanding had escalated into a heated argument. The chief listened intently, mediating the discussion with empathy. He encouraged them to share their feelings, allowing the situation to de-escalate. By the end of the night, the argument had transformed into a conversation, with smiles replacing frowns. This incident became a turning point. The community saw that their chief was not just an enforcer of laws, but a facilitator of dialogue. Slowly but surely, the skepticism began to fade. Residents who had once viewed the police with mistrust started to recognize the efforts being made. Trust was beginning to blossom, like flowers pushing through the cracks of concrete. However, challenges still loomed on the horizon. As the chief worked tirelessly to strengthen community ties, he knew that some remained hesitant. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. But as he looked out into the community, he felt a growing sense of hope. Each conversation, each connection, and each smile was a step toward a brighter future, a future where the police and community could walk hand in hand. As the new chief of police navigated the complexities of his role, he often found himself reflecting on the lessons learned from the past. The journey was not easy. The weight of expectations rested heavily on his shoulders. He had a clear vision for the future, but how could he turn that vision into reality? The path was littered with obstacles, and he was determined to overcome them, but he also understood that change takes time. One chilly autumn morning, he organized a community cleanup event. This was more than just picking up trash. It was about showing commitment to the neighborhood. As residents gathered with gloves and garbage bags, there was a mix of enthusiasm and skepticism in the air. The chief stood at the front, ready to lead by example. He approached a group of teenagers who were lingering on the sidelines, unsure if they wanted to participate. "Hey, you want to help us make this place better?" he called out, a smile on his face. The teens exchanged glances, and one finally shrugged and joined him. "What do we do?" he asked. The chief explained that they would pick up litter along the park, making it a place everyone could enjoy. Slowly, more joined in, and soon laughter filled the air as they worked side by side. Yet, not everything went smoothly. While most people were supportive, a few were still resistant to change. Rumors began to circulate about the chief's motivations. Some wondered if he was merely seeking publicity. One evening, as he wrapped up another community meeting, a local reporter approached him with a pointed question. "Are you just playing politics, or do you really care about the community?" The chief felt a pang in his chest. He wanted to prove that his commitment was genuine, but doubt lingered in the air. In the weeks that followed, the chief organized more events, but the murmurs of doubt continued. He decided to host a series of listening sessions where community members could share their thoughts openly. This was a risk. He knew some would voice their frustrations, but he was ready. "I want to hear from you," he stated during the first session. The room was tense, filled with anxious faces. As residents took turns sharing their experiences, the chief listened intently. Some spoke of their fears during traffic stops, while others recounted stories of positive interactions with officers. One woman stood up, shaking with emotion, recounting an incident where she felt unsafe but was treated with kindness by a responding officer. "We need to see more of that," she exclaimed. Her passion resonated with many in the room. However, as the sessions continued, criticism also emerged. A man stood up, clearly upset. "You think you can just come in here and change everything. You don't understand our lives." His words cut through the room. The chief took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the accusation. "You're right," he replied. "I don't. But I want to understand. Help me learn." This moment marked a turning point. The room erupted in dialogue, with people sharing their frustrations and hopes. With each session, the chief's understanding deepened. He realized that many residents felt marginalized, not just by the police, but by the very system that was meant to protect them. This realization weighed heavily on him. He committed to addressing these issues head-on, recognizing that his position came with a responsibility to advocate for those who felt voiceless. Inspired by the conversations, he launched a mentorship program aimed at local youth. The goal was to connect young people with officers who could guide them and serve as positive role models. This initiative aimed to bridge the gap between the police and the community, fostering relationships built on trust and respect. But the journey was not without its setbacks. At one event, a group of young people approached the chief, expressing their frustrations about the lack of representation in the police force. "We don't see anyone who looks like us," one young woman said, her voice filled with determination. The chief felt a sense of urgency wash over him. "I hear you," he said. "I promise to work on bringing more diversity to our department." As he drove home after long days, he reflected on these conversations. He understood that trust could not be built overnight. Every positive interaction, every moment of vulnerability, was a building block toward a better future. He began to realize that true change required not just policy shifts, but also a cultural transformation within the police force itself. In his spare time, the chief immersed himself in reading about community policing models from other cities. He was determined to learn from their successes and failures. He knew that the more knowledge he had, the better equipped he would be to create sustainable change in his own community. As the months passed, the chief noticed gradual changes in public perception. Residents began to engage more, asking questions and attending events. The feeling of mistrust was slowly lifting, replaced by a growing sense of partnership. He received messages of encouragement from community members, thanking him for his efforts. One day, as he was leaving a neighborhood meeting, an elderly woman stopped him. "You know, I didn't think much of you at first," she said, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "But you've proven that you care. Thank you." Her words touched him deeply, reaffirming his belief that he was on the right path. However, he knew that challenges still lay ahead. Some in the community remained skeptical, and the road to full trust would be long. But the chief was ready to keep pushing forward, motivated by the hope that he could truly make a difference. Each day presented a new opportunity to prove that he was not just a chief of police, but a leader dedicated to his community. He envisioned a future where officers and residents worked hand in hand, transforming their neighborhoods into safer, more inclusive spaces. This vision fueled his determination, and as he looked toward the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change was possible, and he was committed to being the catalyst for that change. In the weeks that followed his promotion, the new chief of police understood that true leadership extended far beyond the walls of the station. He needed to be a visible, relatable figure in the community. This realization drove him to launch a series of community outreach programs designed to foster connections, trust, and dialogue. The first event he organized was a coffee with the chief morning. It was simple yet profound. An open invitation for residents to sit down with him over a warm cup of coffee. But as he prepared for the event, doubts crept into his mind. What if no one showed up? Would the community even care to meet him? The night before the event, he tossed and turned, replaying various scenarios in his head. He feared the empty chairs that might greet him in the morning. As dawn broke, he arrived early at the local cafe, nervous energy coursing through him. He set up a small table with a sign that read, "Coffee with the Chief. Let's talk." He glanced around, hoping to catch a glimpse of familiar faces. Time ticked slowly, and the cafe slowly filled with patrons. His heart sank. Maybe this wasn't going to work. Just then, he saw a mother walk in, her son in tow. She recognized him and smiled, approaching the table. "Is this where I get to complain?" she joked, her voice brightening the mood. The chief laughed, relieved to see a friendly face. "Absolutely. I'm all ears." As they talked, the mother shared her concerns about traffic safety in their neighborhood. The chief nodded, taking notes and promising to address the issue. Minutes later, a small crowd began to form. Soon, there were mothers with their children, fathers discussing sports, and even teenagers stopping by. The atmosphere shifted from uncertainty to a lively exchange of ideas. The chief listened intently, engaging with each person, his enthusiasm growing. "What can we do to make this community safer?" he asked, genuinely interested. As the discussions continued, someone raised a pressing concern about gang activity in the area. The chief felt a chill as he listened. It was a serious issue that had plagued the neighborhood for years. "I want you to know that we are working on it," he assured them. "I can't promise that it will be easy, but we are committed to making a change." This was not just a conversation for him. It was a pledge to do better. He recalled a young man he'd met earlier that week who had lost a friend to gang violence. The pain in the young man's eyes haunted him. This conversation was not just about police work. It was about lives impacted and futures altered. As days turned into weeks, the coffee meetings became a regular fixture, each one drawing more attendees than the last. During one session, an elderly gentleman recounted stories from a time when the police were viewed as allies. "We used to trust you guys," he said, his voice shaky yet firm. "We need that trust back." The chief felt the weight of history in that moment, understanding the gravity of the man's words. Encouraged by the growing participation, the chief expanded his outreach efforts. He initiated family-friendly events like Cops and Kids Days in local parks, complete with games, food stalls, and community booths. He aimed to create a relaxed environment where families could interact with officers in a non-threatening way. The first event drew hundreds of people, children laughing and playing while parents mingled with officers. Yet beneath the laughter, challenges lurked. A few parents expressed their concerns about policing methods, citing recent events in the news that had shaken communities across the country. The chief listened, knowing that addressing these concerns was crucial for rebuilding trust. "What do you think we can do differently?" he asked, opening the floor for suggestions. One mother stood up, her eyes fierce yet filled with hope. "We want to know you see us as people, not just numbers or crime statistics," she said. "Engage with our youth, show them a different path." The chief nodded, recognizing the importance of mentorship and proactive engagement. Inspired by these discussions, he created a youth outreach program where officers could mentor teens and young adults, providing guidance and support. He partnered with local schools, offering workshops on conflict resolution, leadership, and civic engagement. The initiative resonated with many in the community, bringing in volunteers from all walks of life. But not everything was smooth sailing. During one youth workshop, a young participant voiced his frustrations about feeling targeted by police. The room fell silent, tension hanging in the air. The chief's heart raced. "I understand your feelings," he began, taking a deep breath. "But I'm here to learn from you, not to defend the past. What can we do together to change this narrative?" As the dialogue unfolded, the young people opened up, sharing their experiences of feeling misunderstood and alienated. The chief listened, absorbing their words, aware that this was a pivotal moment in their relationship. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Walls were slowly coming down. In the following months, he continued to foster relationships within the community. He attended local events, supported local businesses, and encouraged his officers to do the same. The efforts were bearing fruit. The community began to see the police as allies, not adversaries. However, the road was still long. Some residents remained skeptical, wary of the changes. But the chief remained steadfast, understanding that patience and consistency were key. He continued to prioritize open communication, committed to ensuring that every voice was heard and valued. As he drove through the streets, he began to notice the differences. Neighbors were greeting officers with smiles, and children waved as they rode their bikes. The once tense atmosphere began to feel more inviting, more hopeful. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the police and the community could stand together, united in their vision for a safer, more inclusive future. Every interaction, every event was a building block in the long journey toward healing and trust. The chief understood that while challenges remained, the heart of the community was beating stronger than ever. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to lead with compassion and commitment, determined to create a legacy of positive change.